Caddyshack. What's all Caddyshack mean?
Like, you know, Bill Murray in Caddyshack when he's like, you know, he's just going overboard with the moles and just like blowing them up. Don't get like that.
There's nobody watching it. Hey guys.
Hey.
Okay, some of you are back. Okay, someone said talk about curly tails. Curly tails are also invasive, but they're not a problem in your garden because they don't eat greens.
I feel like the parking lot lizard.
Yeah, they're very
It might mean your garden is really hot if you got curly tails. Those things always seem to be like in the hottest places. I have agamas that I think are similar all over my farm now. There's too many of them.
We also here at Little River Co-op, we have a rainbow lizard problem, which is not really a problem. Rainbow lizards are actually amazing. They're like having small unicorns in your garden. They are rainbow colored and iridescent.
And where they do that little like hand thing.
And they do this little thing where they pick their hands up and they go like this at you. And they live in burrows underground and they eat our bugs and they don't eat our plants.
Someone says curly tails eat my tomatoes and my ají amarillo.
I don't know about that.
You'd have to seeing is believing on that one.
I'd want to see it. I think a lot of times people do things where they'll like associate a bug that they see with a problem, and I really want to make, and like you have to be a little bit detective-y about
okay, there's a question I want to answer. We gotta move on. Okay, so someone asked if I throw my tomato leaf curl in my compost, like, is that a problem? I wouldn't really stress about it that much, to be honest. Like, don't like throw out your compost because you made a mistake like that. I don't think that's.
But also for fungal and viral and bacterial reasons, people do suggest moving around, especially your tomatoes, because tomatoes are such a time commitment. They suggest moving them around every year, and I know a lot of people don't have the space to crop rotate, but you always have the space to crop rotate. If you have the space for like 12 plants, then you have the space to crop rotate in your garden.
Okay, do you throw weeds in the compost? Absolutely, if they don't have seeds on them yet.
Yeah, seeds are the problem.
So you got to learn what a seed is. You know, you have the thing made up. Usually, if weeds make a flower, they've already made a seed. So if your weeds have any sort of like if it's a grass or an amaranth or something that has some seeds, sometimes you can tap the flower on your hand and like little things will come out. Those are seeds, and typically they're viable. And yeah, you would want to avoid putting those in your compost. You can get your compost really hot and cook the seeds out, but in general.
A lot, like I said earlier, a lot of people don't cook their compost enough, which is fine. It's still composting, but you want to make sure then that you're being smart about what you put in there. Ways to get your compost to cook are kind of
make it bigger.
Make it bigger, really, really big. It needs biomass, and in the center cooks, and then you kind of like you can turn it as it cooks. And you can have like a very long thermometer. You need to get this crazy compost thermometer that has like a 2-foot long needle.
A probe
with a thermometer so that you can get all the way into the center and
What about container garden?
I'll go deal with it.
Yeah, okay, hold on.
No, you just talk.
So what about container gardening for nightshades to avoid nematodes? Yes, that'll work. You're growing in medium, so and then another question was about like, should you rotate? Yeah, you shouldn't keep using the same soil, whether it's in the container or the garden for the same plant. You should rotate it. Hopefully. But yeah, if you buy potting mix and you're growing in a container, there will not be nematodes in there. There also won't be a lot of other biological life. Come on, somebody throw a question out there. Dog attacking a curly tail. No, there's dogs attacking another dog. There's a dog at the fence. Early detection of pests. I think one thing I want to. Should you prune half-eaten leaves? It depends on how many of them you have to deal with. So the idea with pruning things that either have been already eaten by pests or fungus or whatever, fungal and bacterial things, it's probably better to prune them. If they're just some wormholes, you'll notice that the holes actually get bigger. which is fine. It's just like a scar in the leaf. I wouldn't really worry about that too much. On the stem of the Everglades tomato, the white substance that the ants keep going for, that's mealy bugs. So similar to aphids, but mealy bugs. Everglades cherry tomatoes and other tomatoes often get mealy bugs when they're at their end of their life, and they're starting to kind of fail because of the end of their life. How to fertilize a mango tree to produce a lot of mangoes. I'm not a mango expert, but in general, fruit trees do not like a lot of fertilization. They like more micronutrients, and they don't really want a lot of nitrogen in order to, if they get too much nitrogen, they absolutely will not fruit. Do you recommend putting a net or screen? Yeah, we talked about that. That's called exclusion. It depends what you're trying to exclude. Usually we're putting nets up if we're trying to keep out iguanas, or we have really sensitive plants like basil. What is the best fertilizer for citrus? I have no idea. I've never been a commercial citrus grower, sorry. In general, we just tell people not to plant citrus because they get so many pests. Calamondins do well, key limes do well, but that's about it. Citrus, they just get the whole gamut, and you can throw every bottle at them and you're not going to get it.
Ants. Well, containers get ants more than gardens because they have all of these like crevasses.
And they stay dry.
And
ants
get really dry.
Ants really love an area that stays dry, in my experience. But ants are a tricky one, man. Ants are kind of like mites. They kind of rule the world. I keep finding branches wrapped in webbing.
Wait, I'm not done talking about ants.
Oh,
We were just don't move on so fast.
Okay, all right.
People do have some success using diatomaceous earth to treat ants, but a lot of times ants aren't really a problem. Like if they're not bringing other pests into your plant sphere, then you can kind of live in peace and harmony with ants. Or you can spray them with one of these hard-bodied insect organic sprays, and you can do it once a day for X amount of days and reduce their populations really low, you know. And let's say, can we stick to pest questions, or are you
Yeah, I like this question about the downy mildew or the black spot on the seedling. I think that's a good one.
What about it?
Well, like if your seedling's showing a fungal or bacterial issue, I mean you're gonna want to prune off the bad leaves right away, and get it in more sun. I think
when one of our seedlings shows a viral issue or a fungal issue, we get rid of it because we are selling plants to people. Like just as an example, you know, right? Like we are presenting ourselves as someone who is growing healthy plants for people. And viruses and funguses and bacteria are so hard to manage that that like we won't just be like, oh, I'm sure the person buying this can figure out how to keep this plant happy, we'll trash it. And so you might want to consider taking that type of approach, like because it's a tomato, it's supposed to last you all season, and it's going to be really time consuming, and it takes up a lot of space, and you really want it to thrive and be worth it. And so I think if you had like a bacterial leaf spot type of thing on it, you should just try again somewhere that isn't as wet.
What are some plants you recommend that invite beneficial insects? We sort of touched on that.
Yeah. Chris likes cilantro.
The cilantro, white flowers, anything that makes small flowers in general.
Yeah, and then there are different beneficial plants for different beneficial insects, so it's a little bit of a broad question. There isn't like a plant that brings in beneficial insects, because beneficial insects is like a whole category of insect, and they all like different things.
Be cautious of very like sort of cut and dry, black and white companion planting rules that you see on the internet, because people are like, oh, you want your tomatoes to do great? Like plant marigolds around them. That's complete BS. Like
we should talk about the marigold thing because I actually hate it.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, the Marigold Myth.
There is like a very strong marigold myth where people are like, I need to plant marigolds throughout my garden as a pest deterrent. Marigolds do have an odor, and some pests don't like the odor, but They are not going to keep pests out of your garden, just like people approach us often looking for things like lemongrass and citronella because they think it's gonna help keep mosquitoes out of their garden. That is not how that stuff works. The citronella or lemongrass, the oil, which is highly concentrated and is brought out of the plant through manual extraction, so like scrunching, mushing, pressing, all that stuff, that is like in a concentrated form, and then you put it on your body. So just having a plant not mushed or scrunched and without its volatile oils being like concentrated or even like activated, just sitting in your garden is not going to do anything for mosquitoes. They don't care about it. So it's kind of the same with marigolds. There is a type of marigold that is referred to as nematicidal marigold, and the way that people use that as a biofumigant is they'll grow a cover crop of the marigold and then they will till it into their soil. And then as it's decomposing in the soil, releasing its volatile oils, those will kill nematodes. And it's like a whole thing. It's a whole type of cover crop.
You're probably not going to do that correctly on a garden scale.
Yeah, but it's very different from like buying a pot marigold and putting it in your garden and being like, this is my pest management plan.
Yeah, we're very familiar with Wakattai, by the way, and it grows anywhere. That's a weed and a really great marigold to grow. So,
yeah. More pest stuff.
More pest stuff.
I'm like looking around the garden, like where can we find some pests?
Yeah.
Yeah, like another thing that you could do, because someone asked a few minutes ago about like cover cropping, like they wanted to know when to do it or whatever.
That was covering their garden. Like I think they meant like covering it with a tarp.
Oh, covering with a tarp. So yeah, so solarizing is something we should talk about, and cover cropping. So cover cropping is basically, we talked about it in the last workshop, so you can watch the third section of the last workshop is about cover cropping. It's a thing that farmers and gardeners now do on where they like plant a plant in their garden as a soil conditioner. But one of the other things that cover crops do for your garden, which is really great, is that they are not host plants for pests. So pests do not like them. They don't deter pests with their aroma or anything. It's just like pests like certain plants to eat and to live on, and they happen to not like to eat or live on those plants. So the main cover crop that we use down here is called sun hemp, and pests do not like it. So a pest will come to your garden, visit, look for something it likes, and leave if it's full of sun hemp, basically. And also, on a microbial scale, the sun hemp is providing habitat for your soil life. All the stuff that lives in there that we can't see, that is very complicated to replicate and very mysterious, like the stars in the sky, like funguses and bacteria and microorganisms, they need something to live in. So if you leave your garden totally bare all summer, then basically we're like, the roots are like their houses.
You're gonna lose
all
your
of
diversity.
a sudden they don't have houses anymore. You're gonna lose a lot of your soil life diversity. If you plant a cover crop, then all of that soil life diversity, whatever, they still have something to live in, and so they stay and they like it. And a barren soil is like if you take antibiotics and you don't have a lot of gut flora anymore, and so then the bad stuff moves in and it gives you like a yeast infection or whatever. It's like the same thing can happen in your soil. If you don't have like all of the balanced good stuff going on down there in root systems, then like some of the bad stuff can really come in and then just like, take over.
Yeah,
So
I have
cover
this saying,
crops are
well,
really
I
great
think it's
like
not
that.
my saying, but like you got to invite everybody to the party with the bugs. And I think, I think the way someone asked about lavender and mint, and I think the way like this to sort of demystify this companion planting is like the more different types of plants you have in your garden, that's like you inviting like more different types of bugs. And sort of the more, if you invite everybody to the party there, you're going to have beneficials, you're going to have bad, things are going to be in balance. But if you have a monocrop or you're just growing one different thing, it's a recipe for disaster. And so I think Yes,
like-
it's good. It's good to have these herbs in your garden. Will they deter that pest that you're trying to get rid of? Not necessarily, but the biodiversity is really important, and it will absolutely, having lots of different plant species and genuses and families or whatever will bring a diverse set of bugs and microbes and critters and fauna, to your garden, and that will be, at the end of the day, a good thing.
Yeah, and also, someone was asking about birds. In general, birds are a good, are a beneficial pest or a beneficial organism in the garden. Sometimes birds will come and peck at like ripe tomatoes or berries, especially if they can see them on the plant. So sometimes you have to compete with the birds. Like if you have a tomato that's like blushing, you can always like go and nab it before it gets like perfectly ripe, because what they're responding to is the color. But the other day I was in a client's garden and I watched a tiny little songbird go and sit on the pepper and like eat all of the aphids off of it, and I was like, yes, because they like bugs. So we actually used to have like a crazy bird population in this garden last season. I don't know, they just came and they went, and they were our main, maybe there are some cats here now, so they were our main actually beneficial organism in the garden last year. They ate all of the aphids. It was really awesome. So birds are good. Birds are good. And
In general, unless you have a bunch of blueberries or cherries or something like that.
right, that's why I said
Yeah.
you gotta like, compete with them for your ripe fruit.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, let's go over our pest management tips. Our pest management tips are basically be really observant.
Farmer's shadow. Be in the garden.
Be in the garden all the time. Ask a lot of questions of your garden and of the internet. Like, look at your plant. Is there a hole? What's on the underside? What's under the plant? What's living in the other plants? Like, what's living in my neighbor's palm tree? Be super observant.
Is it gonna rain? Did it rain? Like, as far as if we're talking about fungal things,
Right.
like all of these things, you got to be observant.
Take really clear, if you're gonna take data from your garden, you need to like go out there with a pen and paper and be really clear about describing your pest, or describing the damage that you think a pest is doing, or describing the damage to your plant, what's happening to your plant, and then you need to go onto the internet, because it's an amazing resource, and you need to ask people on the internet. You can ask an expert at IFAS, like a one-on-one, like you fill out an email form, you attach the pictures, you're very clear. You have to have descriptives. Like, they're not gonna be able to help you unless you go through that ritual of like identifying and interacting with the garden and its surroundings.
Take a good picture.
Take a really good picture. And then also think about whether it even matters that much exactly what type of flying insect, exactly what type of worm. And also you need to decide, am I going to battle this thing? How am I going to battle it?
Is it too late?
Is it too late?
Tough love.
We are always encouraging people to be tough with their gardens. Not every plant is savable. I actually took a screenshot.
If your kale looks like this,
It's not savable. Give them more kale. Look.
Oh yeah, like if it's got the black mold, it's got worm damage. It's probably on its third cycle of worm damage. It's got aphids. It's got the cabbage stem borer.
Also, it's May. Not
Yeah.
just what about
tastes
this
like
plant,
farts.
but it's May.
So
I can
this-
smell it from here.
Yeah. It's outta here.
So you need to be making decisions like that for your garden. Is it worth it? What season is it? Was this a
Yeah.
season appropriate planting? Is that why I'm having such a hard time with bugs? I took a screenshot the other day of somebody who posted a picture of a broccoli that was like stunted and covered in pests, and the picture was taken at night, and it had already flowered and they hadn't harvested the broccoli, and then it bolted, and they were like, oh, here, this is from a gardening forum. What's wrong with my broccoli?
Yeah.
And it can be really challenging to explain to someone clearly, or, that there's so many things wrong.
Yeah, like what's wrong with the farmer?
So many things wrong with this broccoli that it's definitely not about identifying what's wrong with the broccoli. There's a bigger picture issue at hand with nutrition, pot size, stressed out plants. It's very hot out. Maybe this planting wasn't appropriate. Maybe it wasn't getting enough sun. Maybe it's getting too much fertilizer. Maybe it's not getting enough. I know that that's like not really what people want to hear. Like, oh, it's very complicated. It's not about treating the pest, but that's very much the truth. That a happy plant, a healthy plant that's growing at the appropriate speed, that's planted at the correct time of year, is gonna have an easier time than one that didn't, where all of that is not true, and you're just, as the gardener, struggling to keep it alive and pest free. This is supposed to be a hobby. It's supposed to be fun, so you kind of have to take that into consideration too. Like Chris was making a joke earlier about
Caddyshack?
Caddyshack, and how like they became really obsessed with like this one gopher to the point where they like ruined the golf course or whatever. So
don't go Caddyshack on your iguanas or your other pests. Ask yourself, like, is there something else? Is there another way? Use your integrated pest management. Be like, is there something else going wrong here? Like maybe the asparagus plant that I bought at Home Depot just was never meant to grow here, and I should just not grow it. Yeah.
But also, don't let that deter you from trying to manage the pests or all of the organisms in your garden in a responsible way. Like, gardening is in itself like really man-made, really human-y, and so the human does have to get in there and be in charge and manage like a manager, like the organisms that are living in there. So you do need to step in and try to correct imbalances with all the different tools that you have at hand for those imbalances. And some of those tools are organic certified pesticides, and some of those tools are beneficial insects, and some of those tools are happier plants.
Nutrition.
And some of those tools are
more sunlight and more airflow.
Trimming trees, airflow, bringing in beneficials, all this stuff.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we're done. I know you guys, there's still some questions, but I feel like they're more garden questions, less pest questions. And so we'll do more workshops as the COVID thing keeps going, because we really want to make sure that you guys are getting all the information that you need from us in a way that makes sense, like not texting us. So thanks a lot for those of you that stuck with us today. Thanks.